My name is Jeff Pelletier. I'm a trail runner and filmmaker from Vancouver, Canada. I make films about my races and adventures, and I tend to do longer races, 100 miles, 200 miles plus, and of course, a few stage races as well. G2G Ultra was my first stage race back in 2015, and I've done a couple more since then.
Nice, dude. Well, it's good to have you on the show. And I think a lot of people maybe know you now from Moab this year, where you ran a pretty solid race and took second place, which is exciting to watch. But you have a lot of experience now doing stage races and these longer events. And today specifically, I want to talk to you about nutrition because it's such an integral part of these longer events. Like
Yeah.
you can't just get by on gels and drink mix for a week. It's a little bit different than say like a normal 100 or something like that.
Yeah, and stage races and actually these races that are 200 plus miles actually do have a lot in common. And one of those things is the nutrition. Obviously, when you're running a 200-mile race, you might only be having a few naps here and there. So the sleeping and the recovery part's different. But there are a lot of things that hold true. And again, that is sort of the, how you might eat differently when you're running for several days in a 200-miler. It's very similar to a stage race.
Yeah, so let's just jump right into it then. How do you how do you even plan or approach planning for something like this? Because I think if you're going to go backpacking, it's like most people are okay, like maybe 3 meals a day. It's like way slower pace. You can have just kind of like whatever you want, whatever sounds good because you're not running with it. Whereas in G2G, for example, you're running with a solid pack the whole time. So how do you approach planning?
Well, for me, I mean, first of all, I should say that the way you plan for a race like this is going to depend on whether you plan on being at the front of the pack or more towards the back of the pack. And it's a bit of a spectrum in between there. I tend to run at the front and I'm there to try to podium or to do my best at least. And so for me, I'm favoring foods that maybe are a little bit easier and quicker to eat during the run. But I'm going to be eating the same food as the back of packers when we're at camp. Whereas if you're a back of pack runner, again, you're going to be eating meals and things at camp in the evenings, but you might be eating foods that are a little bit different on the run itself. But the same thing holds true for both of those. Any runner in a stage race, you should be really trying to minimize the amount of weight you're carrying. When I did my first stage race, the G2G, I really, my strategy going in was to minimize my pack weight, just to be able to run as efficiently as possible. And that was based on having spoken to a lot of athletes in my community in Vancouver here who had done these kind of races. And so I learned a lot from their experience. And what I saw when I got there echoed what they had told me, which is a lot of first-time runners at a stage race make the mistake of carrying too much stuff because they think, well, I'm not racing to win. I'll bring some extra luxury items. Maybe I'll bring some extra food. I'll bring a Bluetooth speaker. I mean, there were some crazy things I saw there, at least things that I thought were crazy. And unfortunately, a lot of those runners, it seems to be, there's definitely a correlation between pack weight and finishing times. And that is to say that I think carrying a lightweight pack isn't going to make you win the race, but the winners of these races typically have the lightest packs. And often the people who don't finish, or at least who have a very, very hard time finishing, they often have the heaviest packs. And that shouldn't be the case. Everybody should come in with the same strategy, which is carry as little as possible. Because even if you're just walking, even if you're out there for, just to finish, you're not worried about time, you are going to have a much better experience and a much easier time if you have a lightweight pack. And the same thing holds true for backpacking. I do a lot of fast packing where my adventures are kind of like stage races. We run with, big adventure runs, multi-days. We're sometimes carrying a tent or we're running hut to hut. And the same thing is true there. We're not trying to go fast. We're just trying to move fluidly and efficiently. And when you pass people with massive backpacks, you think, what are they carrying? We're doing the same thing. We're all out here surviving in nature. Why are they carrying, a 75-liter pack when I can get away with 25 liters? And it comes down to making the right kind of sacrifices. You're not sacrificing your safety. You're sacrificing luxury. And I think that extends to your food.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I've even just recently I've been on runs where I myself packed way too much for the time and thinking okay, I'm going to eat this much and drink this much. And then the effort was my effort was lower and then the temperatures were lower. So I drank a lot less and ate a lot less. I ended up just carrying a bunch of dead weight essentially the entire time. And for a long run, it's not that big of a deal. But if you carry that for 6-7 days, that adds up.
It compounds, and it's not just the weight, it's also the more weight you're carrying, the more calories you're burning, which means the more food you need to carry. And it's a bit of a vicious circle. And also you can get, again, first time runners will often experience a lot of issues with back pain, with chafing on the back in places that maybe they didn't experience in their training because they didn't train with a loaded pack enough. And so the first thing I would definitely recommend everybody does is to look at what is the required gear. And we are here to talk about nutrition, but start with the required gear, because the difference between a staged race and like I said, a fast packing adventure, fast packing, there are inherent dangers. If you're in the backcountry, if you're in the desert, running on your own, you can get into a lot of trouble if you're not carrying enough stuff. So there's a happy medium there. Whereas in this kind of environment, the beauty of a race like the Grand to Grand is there is an aid station, every couple of hours. There's water. I shouldn't say aid station, water, a checkpoint. There's safety. There's this framework around you. And one of those things, the framework, is about the gear you have to carry. So they're not going to let you run with too little gear. They mandate a puffy jacket, 0-degree sleeping bag, all these things. But don't carry any more than that, Don't carry, like I said, a Bluetooth speaker, a book. I mean, these silly things that, we're not there to relax, and like we're there to push ourselves. So try not to carry much beyond the required gear. And the same thing applies with food. So you asked, like, where do I start? Like, how do I approach this? The first thing I look at is what's the minimum requirement for calories. And it's usually around, I think when I did the Grand to Grand years ago, it was 14,500 calories, I believe, something around that. So that's a good starting point. That'll tell you, what's the least you can get away with. And it's roughly 2,000 a day for most stage races. Now, having said that, you then need to consider your own, sort of, I guess, how many calories you burn and how efficient of a runner you are, how big of a person you are. If you're a smaller, say a more petite woman, you might burn fewer calories than, a larger male. So there are a few considerations there, and you can start to add calories in from there. So I'll usually run with around 16,000 calories. So not a lot more, but a little bit more than the minimum requirement of just over 14. Some people might be, 18,000, but you shouldn't be carrying, say, 30,000 calories. So realistically, you're going to be in a caloric deficit, and that part you need to accept. And that's where then the next step is to make sure you're bringing the most efficient calories, and to not be bringing dead weight or empty calories or, extra calories for that matter, but really making sure that what you are carrying is the most efficient form of energy. And that's where it starts to get interesting, and it starts to get a little bit complicated. And that's where you got to break out the spreadsheets as well.
Yeah, I guess let's talk about the complexity of calories, because if you look at it, I don't know, I did a podcast a while ago, I think it was last year, with someone, we were talking about just nutrition and elite racing, say for Western states. Mm-hmm. And he mentioned specifically that he's like, I don't count calories, but I worry more about the carb and the fat intake.
Yeah.
And that's for a 100-mile race, because you could do 10,000 calories of pure fat, but you're probably not going to feel as well as if you had 10,000 calories of glucose or something. Say you're if you're used to running with that. So kind of, what's kind of the breakdown, I guess, of the types of calories you would bring on an event and why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting that you brought up 100-milers. So a stage race is interesting in the fact that it's more like a series of shorter races when it comes to the running part. So you're doing, for me, I sort of look at it as a series of 40 to 50 kilometer kind of short end of the ultra spectrum efforts. And so I need to fuel during the run like I would be running a race. But then in the evenings when I'm recovering, it's more like I'm doing a 200-mile race or a multi-day event where I'm trying to think about, protein and other macronutrients. And so it's a little bit of a combination. So there's two different things to think about there as far as the types of macronutrients that we're carrying. But at the end of the day, what we're really saying is that you can't survive for 7 days on carbs, on glucose, on gels, like you said. And that's what makes this so different from a single stage, a single day ultra, or even a 100-miler, I would argue. A lot of people do survive on carbs for a 100-miler. It's pushing it, but, to do gels for 24 hours, but some people do. But really, at the end of the day, you are not going to do this for this event. You need to carry a healthy mix. And that's where exactly you break out the spreadsheets. You're looking at carbs, fat, and protein. and you're looking at the mix of those. So what I tend to look at is the first thing I'll do is estimate my moving time for each day. And again, this is where it's going to differ now for the front of pack runners versus the back of pack runners, where I might estimate 5 hours on feet for, a 45 to 50 kilometer effort in a stage race. Others might have to double that. But for me, running at that effort, that pace, I'm looking for simple sugars. And in fact, I'm probably looking for powdered drink mixes for the running portion. And, normally I would try to hit about 250 calories an hour, maybe even more during a race. In a stage race, probably not quite that much because that would add up pretty quick. So maybe I'm looking at 150 to 200 calories worth of simple running foods, simple sugars, drink mixes. Then as soon as I finish my run, I'm probably going to need some protein. So I'm probably going to do a powdered protein recovery shake for the minute that stage is over on a given day. And then you're into your powdered meals, your dehydrated meals. And that's where now you're looking at a mix of not just maybe some carbs, you need to replenish your glycogen stores, but also fat and protein. And protein it's helping us recover. And that's the thing about these multi-day races that you learn very quickly on, is that you are recovering as you go. And you need to be. That's the only way to get through this much running. So by day 3 or 4, you start to feel stronger than you did on day 2, maybe. If you're pacing yourself properly and if you're eating properly, if you're getting that protein in and you're resting enough. So that's what the protein's for. Protein can also act as an energy source. And then you also need fat, and fats to help, with all your vital systems. Fat is very important. And fat is also very calorically dense. And that's something I learned as well. And so I'll usually favor things like powdered cheese products. And by that, I mean like macaroni and cheese. That's one of my favorite dehydrated meals, because bang for buck, you get a lot of calories. There's a lot of fat and there's protein, and that's mainly from the dairy. So powdered dehydrated whey products, whether it be cheese or dehydrated milk, you can get, like, for example, granola with dehydrated milk, and you rehydrate it, and it's high in protein, but that's mainly from the whey. So that's a good example of a product with protein, with fat, and some carbs that I'll usually eat for a dinner. But what I'm then doing is exactly what you said. I have a spreadsheet where I'm adding up all my carbohydrates, including what I'm eating during the run, which tends to be mostly glucose, as well as what I'm eating later in the day for recovery, which tends to be more fat and protein based. But I am adding it all together. So when I look at call it 16,000 calories, I'm saying, well, how many calories are from carbohydrates? How much is from protein and how much is from fat? And I'm trying to get a good mix of the three. So we are thinking about other macronutrients in a race like this, which is very different than a 50K.
Yeah, that's for sure. You don't see a lot of people just slamming protein drinks during a 50K or something shorter like that.
No, and because when you're running a short race, again, during the running portion of a stage race, I am wanting simple sugars. I'm wanting foods that are easy to digest, and fats as well. Fats are hard to digest. They can be hard in the GI. So you don't necessarily want to be eating a lot of fatty food while you're running, whereas you do want those in the evenings when you have time to digest them. Fats also help you feel satiated. And so that's the other thing. If you were to just try to live off sugar, say 16,000 calories or whatever it might be, you are going to be very hungry. Whereas if a lot of those calories are coming from protein and fat in the evenings, you'll feel a little bit more satiated, and you won't quite maybe obsess about food as much as I did the first time.
Yeah, it seems like that's fairly common. Where it's like people buy, for example, just like quote unquote running or hiking food that's just straight up carbs, and then it's like, yeah, like it's good in the moment, but then it's like, oh, I just ate 2,000 calories, and you're still starving after that.
And you're still starving. Your body knows what it needs, right? And the funny thing is, it's funny you mentioned that. I remember I was at the Grand, my first stage race. I bought one of those dehydrated ice cream bars that it's ice cream and then like the Oreo thing. And it was like, oh, I'm going to have this as a treat midway through the week. But it turned out it was all carbs. I didn't really look at it. I thought, oh, it's ice cream. It's going to have protein. There was almost no protein in it. It was just sugar. So then all I'm doing is I'm sitting there at night in my tent eating sugar. What I really should have brought was, protein or fat. So my next stage race, what I brought was a little pack of I can't remember if it was candied or but anyway, smoked salmon in like a little bag with it had some oils in it and stuff. And that was the most delicious, fatty, I had my omegas, protein. It was the most delicious treat. I was licking the bag, licking the oils. And since then I've started to use oils a lot as well. So olive oil is a great way to get It's one of the most calorically dense foods, and it's got lots of fat. So olive oil is that you can bring a little packets of it you can buy, or you can just fill up your own little bottle maybe, and you can actually put that on top of your meals in the evening. So that's a great way to supplement as well. So you really are looking for a balance of, not just total calories, but how much of that caloric content is coming from carbs versus fat versus protein. And that thing about sort of, total calories as well. Again, this is the personal preference thing. So for me, 16,000, I'm still basically starving myself. I am on a starvation diet, but that's trying to find the balance between weight and calories. And I'm trying to move as quickly as possible. And at some point, your pack's too heavy to really run. Whereas if you are out there mostly to sort of jog and mostly walk, you can probably afford to bring a little bit more food, and it won't affect the fit of your pack as much. But again, you don't want to overdo it, because if you're carrying 25,000 calories, 30,000 calories, your bag is going to be so heavy. You're going to have pounds of extra weight. And it's, again, that downward spiral we talk about. You end up going slower. You're out there for longer. You need even more calories. You're exposed to the heat for longer, and you're not sleeping as much. And you really should be sleeping as much as you possibly can in these races. I like to sleep a good 10 hours. I'm taking a nap. I might be getting as much as 12 hours of sleep each night, which is more than I would ever get in my day-to-day life.
Let's talk for a moment about personal preference in foods, because like what I run with and what I enjoy while on the trail is probably not the same as what you enjoy while you're out there. Or maybe like your luxury item of having like that salmon, for example, may not be what I like. So
Yep.
I guess the question is like, what do you think is like the benefit of choosing foods that you're going to love versus like things that people just recommend on the internet that you've never tried before?
Yeah. And this is a problem, or I guess a consideration for a race of any distance. And that's where the solution is simply variety. The more options you can give yourself, the less likely you are to get flavor fatigue. And sometimes you can't stomach something. So this is all about, variety, planning for that inevitability. So as much as I mentioned, I love the mac and cheese, I always bring a variety. I might bring one of those dehydrated pad thai meals, and I'll bring a few different flavors and a few different things so I can mix it up, never eat the same thing 2 days in a row or 2 meals in a row. So that's definitely the first step. The second step is simply, you got to test this stuff. You can't be doing anything new on race day, and that definitely applies to food as well. And you need to test it during your training. So when it comes to the run nutrition, like I said, I might favor, powdered drink mixes and things like that. Gels have liquid in them. Gels are actually fairly heavy. So I'll usually do more lighter weight stuff for during the run, but I would train with that, make sure it works for me. And try to train with it during the conditions you're going to be facing. And that can be a challenge. If you're coming from a cold environment and you're racing in the desert, in the Grand to Grand, it can be hard to know, what's going to sit well. Things, what's digestible, what's palatable, but also what the texture of that thing's going to be like in, 35 degrees Celsius weather versus, 15 degree. Sorry, I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but, in hot weather versus cooler weather. So that can be a little bit difficult. In a perfect world, you test it in the right environmental conditions, but definitely testing it while you're actually moving, while you're actually running. The dehydrated stuff for at night, that's a little bit tougher to test. I know some people will say they'll actually try to just live off those for a couple of days, but you're not really simulating the environmental conditions and the fatigue and things. So that's a little bit tougher. The other part, I think, is knowing yourself as an athlete. And this is where experience comes in. So for me, I have a pretty iron stomach. I think that is definitely just like something. I'm just lucky that way. I'm lucky that way. I don't tend to get GI issues. I never get sick during a race. And also, I'm not the fussiest eater, so I can usually force anything down. So it's less of a concern for me. But if you're the kind of person that does get GI issues, you really need to test that stuff and experiment. So that's going to be more important for you for sure. But again, that other point of lean on variety, because the worst thing you can do is bring all of the same thing and not want to eat any of it. Whereas at least if you have variety, worst case, it's only a little bit of food that might go to waste. And one example of that is I love bars when I train. Doesn't matter the brand. I love eating bars, peak bagging. I'll climb a mountain and sit down and take in the view and eat a bar. I hate bars when I'm racing because I always feel like it's hard to choke them down, especially in a warm race. It's so hard to choke them down. And so I just don't eat them. I end up just not eating. I end up favoring gels, powders, simpler sugars. I've learned that about myself, but it took a couple of races with not enough food because I had brought mainly bars. It took that to learn that lesson. So these are all lessons you need to experiment with, and you need to learn those lessons in training.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I guess thinking too of like just like the day-to-day kind of operations out there, planning for those. So it's like, okay, you're gonna have at Grand specifically, you have this 7 days and 6 stages. So like,
Mm-hmm.
how would you go ahead packing your food for say like day one, day two, where day one's like a 50K, and day two is another
Yeah,
50K-ish. Like, do you put everything like in a gallon Ziploc bag, for example, and do you repurpose and repackage things to cut weight and bulk? Or like, what are you doing specifically when you're packing your food for the week?
for sure. So the first step is to plan your food by the day, by the meal, in fact. So as much as I'm talking about 16,000 calories per week, 18,000 calories, at the end of the day, what you're really doing is you're getting to that number by breaking it down by the day. So day one, day two, I might be doing 2,200 calories a day. The long stage, I believe, is still day three. I'm doing more calories. I'm running a lot more. So that might be a 2,500, 2,600 calorie day or more. That might be a 3,000 calorie day because I need more run food. I'll still just have a protein shake and a meal for at the end, but during the run, I need a lot more food. Now, the day off, the 0 day following the long stage, which I should say, if you're a faster runner, that's a 0 day. If you're back of pack, you might be coming in very late at night and you're still sleeping. You need less food. You're not exercising that day. But mentally, that's a challenge. Mentally, you are going to be sitting around at camp, with not a lot to do. So you'd be thinking about food a lot, but at the end of the day, you're not burning as many calories. But you might favor more protein and fat for that day, not as much glucose, not as much carbs for that day. Now, of course, the last stage, you're not running at all. That's a very short stage. So you don't need much for that, and you don't need other macronutrients. You can just have some simple sugars left for that stage. So when you really start to break it down, again, this is where your first step is to think about how much time do you plan to spend out there? What are your goals for running? And then that you can extrapolate from there and start to think, well, how many hours of run food do I need? How many, am I doing 200 calories per hour? Well, that gives you, your target for run food versus other nutrition. And then you should really be breaking it down by the day. Now, then for each day, what I'll do is I will put everything into, like a big freezer lock bag, and I'll label on it day one. And that way I'm not accidentally eating food from a different day. I don't have to do math. I can just pull up my day one bag and there's my food for the day. I might also then repack some of the dehydrated meals. So I'll probably smash them up with a hammer before opening it, get it into a nice powder, and then I'll pour them into a Ziploc bag as well. And I can just rehydrate right in the bag. And that's a little bit, it's not so much the weight of the bags of these meals that's the problem. It's actually the bulk. They're very bulky. Now, word of warning, they don't hydrate as well when you do that. They don't, because it doesn't insulate as well. So some people will actually bring one of those original bags empty and just use that to rehydrate. Like I said, I'm not a picky eater. I can eat some crunchy noodles, so I don't bother. But that is something to consider, especially if you're ever doing this in a colder environment. That strategy isn't quite as effective. But in the desert, it's less of an issue. It's cold at night, but it's not below freezing typically. So, I'm repackaging the actual meals themselves into maybe liter freezer bags, labeling them, how many calories, what's exactly in them, and then I might be putting all of that again into a bag for the day. Now, be careful with these bags, though. Don't overdo it with the bags inside of bags, because these bags do weigh a little bit. The freezer bags can weigh anywhere from 8 to 12 grams in my experience. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you have 20 of these, that can add up pretty quickly. And this is a game of grams and ounces. Those add up to pounds and kilograms pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like if you're trying to save weight, but then you end up like maybe even gaining weight or not even saving as much as you thought because you're multiple bagging things like that. Yeah, it's just probably because you learn that by experience, right?
You do. Again, you just don't want to overdo it with the bags, but you also don't want things to blow up in your pack. But yeah, the other little thing I'll just caution people about is when you're traveling internationally, which is usually the case for myself. I'm coming from Canada. We don't have a lot of stage races here, and so I'm usually going to the States or internationally to, I should say, abroad. I've done stage races in Georgia and in Namibia. And one tip is to bring all your meals in their original packaging. I usually pack them in my actual checked luggage as well, not carry-on, just to make it easier to get through the customs and stuff. But in case they do scan your bags, you want those bags in their original packages, and then do all this repackaging I mentioned. Do it at your hotel right before the race. You'll have a much easier time than trying to fly with a whole bunch of unmarked powders in little baggies.
Yeah, I actually got stopped one time at an airport because I had a baggie of protein powder, and they pulled me aside, put me in a room, and did the whole like bomb scan on it because they didn't know what it was, and like obviously you
Well,
can tell them what it
exactly.
is, but they have to go check
No,
it. It's
exactly.
scary.
So much easier to just leave it in the original packaging. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. That's a good tip. Let's talk about the water situation then, because at Grand to Grand, like obviously you have water at camp in the mornings, you have water at checkpoints, and then water at camp at night again.
hmm
So how do you utilize I guess, the available water on course and in camp to help minimize the amount of weight that you're carrying?
Sure. I mean, and this is something that I kind of glossed over because I assumed everybody knew this. But really, when we're talking about powders, drink mixes, we're talking about dehydrated meals. The whole idea here is to eliminate water weight. That's really where weight comes from in food products. Gels, running gels, those are great for a 50K race where there's aid stations and you can pick them up along the way. But those things have water in them. I mean, bars are usually pretty lightweight. They're usually pretty dried bars, but fruit, of course you're bringing dehydrated fruit. You're not carrying hydrated, like, real fruit, because there's water weight in all those products. So this is just, again, it's an assumption I made that everybody would understand this, but it's worth maybe pointing out that there's a reason we bring dehydrated products, because water is then available to rehydrate them. There's a difference, I should say, between dehydrated and freeze-dried. So commercial freeze-dried products are actually what we're looking for in most cases. When it comes to our meals, the name brand meals, they're not cheap. They're sometimes $15 a pop. And part of what you're paying for is the freeze drying process that they use. It's a commercial process they use. And then they bag it up and they put one of those little moisture baggies in it. That process eliminates more water content, moisture content, while retaining more nutrients than trying to dehydrate meals yourself. So it's not the same as using one of these $200 dehydrators from Amazon and doing it at home. These are commercially freeze-dried products. You do get your money's worth in that regard. So again, you're getting more calories, or at least you're getting more nutrients with less weight. And at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do here. So I would definitely recommend, don't try to save money by dehydrating your own meals. This is not the place to save money. These races they're not cheap, right? And we're buying all this equipment. So I think I would definitely say buy your commercially freeze-dried meals as well. Don't try to dehydrate. It won't be as effective. You won't get the nutrient concentration that you need. And that's what's happening there is they're freeze drying it. They're removing the moisture, and then you can put that moisture back in because you're getting water at the end of the day. Now, some people who are back-of-pack runners may actually want to use a freeze-dried meal, particularly for the long stage, partway through the day. So for me, I think that stage took me, it was a good 11 hours. It was a long stage, and I think I finished second in that stage. And so that tells you kind of, I think the front packs started a little bit later, I think, and I finished just before midnight. And the back of pack runners had started earlier, and some people didn't come in until the next morning. So in that case, you are going to be stopping at some point and making dinner en route during that stage. So again, that's where the strategy is a little bit different from the front of pack versus back of pack. But generally, those meals are for at camp. And that's, again, where there's water available and you can rehydrate them. There's water available on the course. You could make those along the way. Anybody could do those at any stage, but it takes time. It's 15, 20 minutes to rehydrate, and you have to sit there and, so it's ideally not something you're doing during the run itself. But then also the run food, these drink mixes I mentioned, they're an effective way to get calories in during the run as well. And again, they're powders you put in your water, and you are getting water at each checkpoint. So you're sort of, using the benefit there of having the support that you wouldn't normally have if you're just out in the desert on your own, and you're using a calorie-based and an electrolyte, hopefully a highly concentrated electrolyte product. I'd recommend brands like Scratch Nutrition, Scratch Labs. They make an excellent dehydrated or drink mix, I should say, that is very high in electrolytes, and that tends to work well for people who have stomach problems typically with these kind of products. The one I use more often is from a brand called NAC, who is a Canadian brand who they've grown recently. They're now the sponsor of the UTMB World Series. And NAC's drink mix actually has proteins and amino acids built in as well. So I like that for that reason. There's lots of different brands out there, so definitely you need to experiment with that. So we're using the water during the course, during the run itself, with our drink mixes, along with anything else, bars, gels, whatever else you choose to eat while you're running. And then in the evenings, we're using the water provided to rehydrate our meals.
Awesome. So as we kind of like get towards the end of our time here, could you like just say you're going to do Grand to Grand this coming year, for example? I know you're not, you have other events going on. But let's just say you're going to run it. Like, how would you prepare for, let's just kind of do like an example of like, say day one, like what would you bring, or maybe day two is a better example. You're in the race and like, how would you kind of plan out your calories for that day two, which is about a 50K distance?
Yeah, so for that, I'd probably be doing about 900, maybe 1,000 calories for that 50K, because I'm assuming about 5 hours on feed. That would be about my pace typically for these races. And I think that's about what I ran at Grand to Grand. It was about an hour per 10 kilometers is the way I would think about it as a Canadian. So so I'm looking at about 5 hours, and I would probably bring up to 1,000 calories, probably again around 150 to 180 per hour realistically. So maybe closer to 800. Now, the thing is, there's a risk on that strategy, because what if I have a bad day and it takes me 6-7 hours? I don't have enough food. I might run out of food. So the assumption is that as I go, I would adjust my eating as well. Because if it takes me longer, it's probably because I'm moving slower and therefore I'm burning fewer calories, which means I need to adjust my consumption. I need to be taking in fewer calories than I would be otherwise, or else I'm going to run out. And I would rather be doing fewer calories per hour than run out of food 5 hours into a 7-hour effort. So that's a caveat there if you're really trying to cut it close like this. Worst case, I could dip into my day two food, but that's obviously, you can only go so far with that. At some point, you are going to run out of food. And then I would have a protein shake. So the minute I finish, the first thing I would do would be to mix up my protein shake. And you can buy individually packaged protein shakes, single serving protein shakes. There's a bunch of different brands, but again, Scratch has a good one. There's a whole bunch that have individually packed ones. NAC has a good one as well. It's plant-based, so depending on your preference. And I would have a nap. That'd be the second thing I would do when I get back to camp. And I would try to wait as long as possible for dinner, but I wouldn't have a lunch. I typically would skip a lunch. I've tried both strategies. I've also done it where I do bring a little lunch, maybe a few hundred calories, and it's extra weight. But some people might find that they do need a light meal when they finish the stage because they can't wait that long for dinner. Others might find that they can wait, and when they have dinner, it'll be a big one. It'll be 1,000 calorie dinner. It won't be 600 calories. But really, I'm probably looking for about 1,000 calories worth of food when I finish, separate from the run. So I'll probably be looking at around 2,000 calories for that first day.
And that's going to be a mix of, like you were saying earlier, the carbs, the fat, and the protein, right?
Exactly. On the run, it's almost pure carbs. And then afterwards, it's almost all, certainly the protein shake is almost all protein, a little bit of glucose. And then my meal will be a mix of, it'll probably be, like I said, a mac and cheese type product where there's quite a bit of powdered whey, that cheese, I should say, and some fats. I might put some olive oil on that as well. And that gives me some extra fat. And then the carbs from the macaroni.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Are there any tips you'd have? Like, say you had like a tip on top of your head to give somebody that was going to run their first stage race, or the first Grand to Grand, what would it be as far as nutrition goes?
Yeah. So again, experiment. Don't bring too few calories. I don't want you starving and saying, well, Jeff Pelletier told me to only bring 16,000. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you need to throw out everything you think you know about food and nutrition and start from the ground up. And the starting place is, first of all, thinking, how many calories do I burn in a day? And most people, their metabolic base rate might be between 2,000 to 2,500. And then you're thinking, well, how much am I going to be running each day? Well, maybe I'm burning 800 calories an hour. I'm going to aim to replace maybe half or a third of that. Do the math, right? So really, this is, for a lot of people, this is the first time they really start to count calories. And I promise you, when you're done this process, and certainly when you're done this race, you will never look at food in the same way. You'll forevermore think of food as we should, as fuel. It's what keeps us moving. It's what helps us recover. It's got, of course, other little benefits as well. But at the end of the day, we're the food you are eating for this race is to keep you moving and get you to the finish line. This is not about enjoying food. That's what the rest of you will have a few weeks, trust me, of pure enjoyment of food when this race is over. You will enjoy food like you've never enjoyed it for those first couple of weeks as you put some weight back on. I don't want people starving and starving themselves unnecessarily. But again, it's about really thinking critically about how much food you do need. And don't just go into it with these assumptions we've developed in our lives of the kind of food we eat without thinking about it. So again, for some people, they might need 18,000, 20,000, 22,000, whatever that number is. I want you to have arrived at it by using a spreadsheet and really thinking about it. Every gram, every ounce counts here.
Yeah, definitely. I think really it's one of those things where it's a logistical aspect of the race. Like shorter events have maybe less nutritional planning, but these longer ones, it's very critical, and it just takes a few minutes to sit down and go over it, and you're gonna have a way better experience if you eat appropriately and you're not just bonking for 6 or 7 days straight.
Yeah, you need to eat enough food for sure, but it's not enough food to be happy. It's enough food to be healthy, to be moving. That's what you're looking for here. It's also not, you don't need to think about this as, there's people who do these through hikes, the PCT, and they're on the trail for 6 months. And I've heard a lot of people say, these hikes, they're not very healthy because you're out there eating this high sodium, we're talking about a mix of macronutrients here, but what I haven't talked about is micronutrients, because you might have to throw your micronutrients out the window a little bit for this week. I mean, you're not looking necessarily at vitamins as much. I mean, we're looking at electrolytes. So there are considerations around minerals. But I'm not suggesting this is the way we're going to eat for the rest of our lives. This is a vacation from healthy eating to think about fueling effectively for a week, recovering effectively for a week. Those are your goals. But certainly this shouldn't be something that you do. You shouldn't be eating these freeze-dried meals for the rest of your life. That's very unhealthy. Unfortunately, we are only doing it for a week at a time with these races, not 6 months at a time, like on the PCT. So yeah, you need to eat enough, but just don't carry more than you need. And that's really going to get you through this race. And again, it's a whole other conversation, but that extends to all your gear choices as well. Do not bring anything you don't need. We tend to pack our fears. And in this case, like I said, there's a list of gear that you need, and that list is carefully considered. And so bring that list, but don't bring too much extra above that list, because at some point, all you're doing is packing your fears.
That's very good advice right there. Yeah, just as we wrap up, just thanks for your time, man. Really appreciate it. It's you've definitely had some performances over the years and you have a lot of experience. It was good to hear, just straight from your mouth, how to have a successful grand to grand nutritionally speaking. Where can people look you up?
So it's
Instagram,
been fun.
Strava, and that sort of stuff. And YouTube,
I'm
I
always,
guess.
hopefully I can come back maybe and talk about gear at some point as well. One other little tip I'll throw in here. This isn't related to nutrition. Think about chafing and specifically how your pack feels on your back, on your lower back, and on your shoulders. And a quick tip, I learned this at my first Grand to Grand. The excellent first aid staff helped me with this. Use KT tape and pre-tape any places in your body where you might get rubbing and chafing. And do this before the rubbing starts. So for me, it's on top of the shoulders and it's my lower back. Because if you wait too long and that skin rubs off, it's too late. And so again, we're talking about trying to minimize pack weight and not just that, but volume, making sure your pack feels good when you're moving. So that's sort of tied in, but a preventative measure is definitely a pre-tape.
For sure. So let's just wrap it up here then, man. I really appreciate it. Can we find you on Strava, Instagram, YouTube, and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, Strava, Instagram, and YouTube. And I have a couple of races for my more recent stage races on there. And I do go into detail on strategy, and you see my recovery process and everything. So if you want to see how one of these races is run from the front of the pack, my first one I finished in, my first one of those films I finished in 4th, and the second one I finished in 2nd place. And so you can kind of see how that comes together with really this, minimizing weight and training and everything that goes into it to finish on the podium in a race like this.
Definitely. And I would say for anyone watching, I'll put a link in the description on YouTube and in the show notes and stuff. But definitely watch some of your videos because I think you can glean a lot of information by watching other people and seeing what mistakes they made and maybe adapting strategies to whatever you're doing and vice versa and whatever. So definitely check out those videos because they are very, very interesting and fun to watch.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. And we'll have to talk soon.